Welcome to episode 54 of the Liz McMullen Show. I am welcoming back Phair, who was on the show for the Halloween special. And that was fantastic. And I was like, I like her. So I asked her to come back, and amazingly she said yes. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back. I enjoyed it last time, and I'm looking forward to this.
You know, I was reading your stuff, obviously, because this is a review show. And I have a question. I grew up in New York City was my city of knowledge, what I'm familiar with, the streets, the neighborhoods. And I want to know, is the MFA building like a big landmark that, because I noticed it both in Commencement and in
Yep.
The Ripper's Daughter.
Yep. The Museum of Fine Arts Boston is on Huntington Avenue, and it is just down the street from Northeastern University, not even 2 blocks. And I went to graduate school at Northeastern University, and so I spent a great deal of time in that area. And the Museum of Fine Arts is located in sort of this transitional area. On one side of it is the busy Huntington Avenue, but not the college end of the Huntington Avenue, more the end that has a couple of bars, and you've got colleges and the hospitals on either side of it, but then you have this sort of challenged area.
You are just so tap dance. Are we talking? Are we talking slightly dilapidated?
Well, they're trying not to make it as dilapidated, but
it's like, is this a financially challenged area?
It's a financially challenged neighborhood, and it's the crossroads really, like between what we consider the Fens, which right on the other side of the Fens is Kenmore, where you have Fenway Park, and Roxbury, which Roxbury, Massachusetts, is a financially challenged section of our city. It has a higher crime rate than the rest of the city.
The city is Boston, by the way, folks.
The city is Boston, yes. And then, just to the other side of that is, Northeastern University, Copley Square, the Copley Library, the Arlington Street Church, the Christian Science Monitor with its beautiful reflecting pool. So you have this, sort of, beautiful area of the city that's really steeped in tradition and history. That's the section of the city that we show off most on television. Oh. And then you have this other area of the city that is really, struggling for survival. And the Fens, where any crazy thing can happen in the Fens. It's just any nutty thing at all can happen in the Fens.
Where is it in relation to what's considered Southie?
What's that?
Where is it in relation to the neighborhood that's known as Southie?
It's not anywhere near Southie. This would be what would be the downtown section of the city. Why is
you mentioned Dead Town? Is that just a tease on the words for downtown?
We were going to call The Ripper's Daughter Dead Town.
Oh.
And there was a book that came out shortly before we published called Dead Town, and we decided to call it The Ripper's Daughter. But there is at the beginning of The Ripper's Daughter, the character wakes to a song. The police character wakes to a song, and it's those shock kind of DJs. And they're doing a spoof on the newest murder victim, and they're singing along to the tune of Downtown, but they're calling it Dead Town, yes. Which is kind of macabre, but I don't thrill a lot of writing it.
Well, I mean, so much of entertainment and comedy skirts that border of, I don't know if pleasure and pain is for, if it wasn't, if I didn't laugh, I'd be crying. That kind of.
Well, yeah, it's the whistling past the graveyard. Ring Around the Rosie was about,
the Black Death,
the plague. Pocket Full of Posies was because everyone was dying.
Yeah.
It really is a great deal of, whistling past the graveyard that we do, because our mortality is right there. And when we see the people around us felled, we have to start thinking that, eventually our number's coming up.
It's just so freaking twisted. Things are changing what they sing to children these days. 3 blind mice chopping off their tails. Mm-hmm. You rock a child and sing the Rockabye Baby about like a fucking baby who gets knocked out of a tree.
Well, it's funny, and I'm stealing this from my sister, who is a brilliant person, and she works in the legal system, and her view is fairy tales were a brilliant approach by people trying to explain to children that if they didn't stay around their homes, if they didn't keep an eye on their parents, stay close to their parents, then they would disappear. And there are things in the forest that will eat you. But they're not wild animals. And, it really, we worry now about what happens to children and, the crimes against children. But it has been going on as long as people have been alive. And fairy tales were a great way for parents to really terrify their kids about getting too far away from home, because what happens when you do can be very, very bad.
Well, there's that, and there also was a lot of women dying in childbirth. So these stories about like the evil stepmother and
Mm-hmm.
Stepsisters and fathers raising their children alone, and
we know how difficult it is to raise blended families.
Mm-hmm.
We realize that today, and we talk about it, in terms today, that it's still very difficult for step parents and stepchildren. And some people are doing amazing work with it now, but can you imagine it being, you've got to fight for survival. You don't know if you're going to have enough food on the table. Which child are you going to feed? The one that you gave birth to, or the one that came with the husband?
Well, there's also the political and financial reality of women up until maybe the last 100 years or so. Their only option for safety, including having a roof over their head and food in their mouth, is through finding someone to marry and provide for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
So, well, there's that, and you got to think of the mindset, like, okay, I have no choice. I have to be living within this system. I have to find a way to provide for me and my family. Mm-hmm. And I think I watched too many episodes of Deadly Women.
We should probably preface this, we skipped a rather large point here. We should preface this by saying that these are, what we're talking about right now, are paternalistic societies.
Yes.
There are maternalistic societies where the women...
Matrilineal and matrilocal and...
Yeah, and I love the story about how the Celts used to race into battle behind a woman naked on a horse.
Boudica?
No, that was the Iceni.
Oh.
They were in whatever the British Isles today, but the Irish, the Celtics, the Druids, they were all a very maternalistic society. And if you've ever tried to have dinner with an Irish family, you see that still today.
Yeah, I think people have been tipped off by my last name that I might be a Mick. It's possible. One of the things that's amusing, and even in like one of the wealthier households in the neighborhood I grew up in Hoboken, is all the action, all the social interaction would happen in the kitchen.
Yeah. Right, that's where the power is. All the power brokers are in the kitchen.
It's not just the way, it just was so funny. I mean, just on the next block from where I live, there was, an Irish family. The father is a lawyer and politician and whatnot. And such a lovely house and a beautiful sitting room and dining room. But everyone is in the kitchen.
Yep. Well, that's that. If you want to know what's going on, you've got to be with the people who know what's going on in the house, and women will in the Irish tradition, women do rule it. As my mother warned one of her brother-in-laws because he wasn't treating her sister properly. She said, if you were married to me, you'd wake up dead. And which is just, it's such a great Irish saying.
I was like, yeah, you say the darndest things.
I would get an iron and you would wake up dead.
Well, or things in the household like, you better run, because if I catch you.
But we've certainly traveled. So I guess if we get back to the first premise of your first question, which started with the Museum of Fine Arts. Yes, the Museum of Fine Arts.
We have gone so far afield.
I know, I can't even think how you're going to edit this.
I'm not going to edit it. It's this cute.
Oh, good. It's just going to be this rambling.
You know what? Fuck it. The whole point is to have like an intellectual, interesting conversation, people with experiences and whatnot. And I have to tell you that I should really stab you for making me cry so much in Commencement.
Did you like Commencement?
I hate you. You made me cry over and over. I'm trying to read through my tears. You fucking bitch.
The shocking thing about Commencement. You ready?
Yeah.
The shocking thing about Commencement is how it came about.
Okay.
It was a story that was a complete departure for me from what I was writing at that time. Mm-hmm. It was the week I was planning on going to my nephew's high school graduation at a very posh school. He got a scholarship to go to this really posh high school. And for some bizarre reason, I was stuck in line at the grocery store earlier in the week buying him his graduation card. And I saw a book of quotations for Mr. Rogers. Mrs. Rogers actually compiled a short, just a little book with some of his better quotations. Mm-hmm. And so I was stuck in line for a while, and I was like, this is cute, I'll read it. And some of them were very nice. If you ever get a chance to pick up the book on Mr. Rogers' quotations, I highly recommend it. You'll feel better about humanity. So I was thinking about that book all week, and then thinking about going to my nephew's graduation, and my sister-in-law warned me. She said it would be not like any commencement I had ever been at, that they did things a little differently. And I started thinking about that because it was a very well-to-do school. We aren't well-to-do people. And I thought, I wonder how a kid who doesn't fit in would do at their high school commencement. And I dashed off the first chapter of that book as a short story about this kid who was really alienated and sort of let down by society. And, and I thought, what would happen to her if she went to her high school graduation, not to participate in graduation, but to actually work it, because that's all she was going to be allowed to do. And somebody like Mr. Rogers noticed her and changed her life. And it just started as this little tiny short story. I wrote it down. It took me maybe 2 hours to write the first chapter of that. And I put it out on my homepage. And when I came home from my nephew's high school graduation, which was as bad as I thought it was going to be, it really was a very difficult graduation to get through.
Why? What happened?
Well, it was very difficult. Rich people do things differently. But when I got home, my email...
Stop sidestepping that. I'm interested. I mean, I went to Mount Holyoke, and
I'll go back and tell you about it. But
okay.
when I got home, my inbox was filled with over 200 emails from people who read the story. And I had never had before or since such an overflow of emotion about a short story I wrote. In the first chapter, I think it might be 3,000 words tops. I haven't looked at it in a long time. And people were begging for more information about what happened with Lindsay. And the graduation ceremony, the reason it was so difficult was because there were only 11 kids in the graduating class. And between the principal and the vice principal, they talked about each one of the kids graduating. And not just nice things, but they said some things that were very difficult, I think, for people to hear. And I thought it was a lot for 18-year-olds to have to sit through. And I knew it was a lot for me as a grown-up, sitting there listening to what the principal really thought about some of her students.
Ugh.
Yeah, they're a progressive school, and, I kind of understand what the whole idea behind it was, but I couldn't imagine being 18 and having that kind of moment. And so coming back from the graduation, by the way, my nephew did great. He's a great kid. Loved that boy. But coming back from that graduation and getting the response I did, and some of the emails that I got from people were if you thought you cried reading Commencement, you have no idea the night I spent reading those emails from people who were so destroyed by their high school experiences. By their teenage years. And it didn't all come down to sexuality. It didn't all come down to, definitely folks who are having experiences with coming out or, not fitting in and not really knowing why they didn't fit in. Definitely those were there, but there were the people who looked different, the people who sounded different, the people who just felt out of place. It was so painful reading those stories, and they all identified with this character of Lindsay Lee Ash. And so I knew they asked me to write more about her, and so I did.
Did you choose her last name intentionally, or it was just something that happened when you were writing?
Actually, it's one of the few intentional things I did. I'm not a really intentful kind of writer. I get an idea and I throw names in. In my book, The Ethereal Sea, there are 2 names in the book that were my dogs' names because I couldn't come up with anything else, so I threw their names in thinking they would be place savers. And I was like, well, you know what? They're actually kind of cool names. So, but with Ash, that was chosen deliberately. Her last name was chosen deliberately. It really carries sort of the Cinderella quality to it, the ashes, and so her last name was chosen deliberately.
For me, I felt it was a very gritty last name, and I didn't associate it with Cinderella. She just had, somebody had been so burnt and scalded by life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's definitely that there as well.
And and it's not, and it was not evocative of rising up from the ashes, and shit just kept on happening to this girl, and she had a fucked up mom for sure.
And the thing that is really hard for me with the parent that I created for her, that wasn't the worst parent I've ever met in real life. Mm-hmm. Like, that young girl's parent was bad. The parent on paper was bad, but sadly, she wasn't the worst parent I've ever met. Now, I'm nobody's mom, but I do know what good parenting looks like, and sometimes you hear these stories of what some people survive, and you can't even believe that their parents are the same species as the rest of us. And then
do you work as a social worker?
I work in healthcare.
Okay.
And sadly, I work with the elderly. And not sadly, I love working with the elderly, but even as people are approaching the ends of their lives, when they begin to deal with Alzheimer's and dementia, sadly, a lot of the experiences they had with their parents start to haunt them again. And I hear a lot of terrible stories. I hear a lot of great stories. Don't get me wrong. But if we think that, child abuse is epidemic now, we're just not speaking to older adults.
Well, it was invisible. It wasn't spoken of. And I guess I feel like so many things were visible starting in the 70s, from divorce to just so many things that were swept under the rug, not spoken of, not proper.
Well, the ability to have mass communication changed in the 70s. Our ability to share information, instantaneously changed. I think it probably changed with the Kennedy assassination. The country found out within hours that he was dead. When you think about the assassination before that, it was days. Mm-hmm. When Lincoln was killed, it was days. When the Titanic went down, the initial reports that hit New York were there were no fatalities. That the ship was, slugging into port, but it would make it. Mm-hmm. So in the 60s and 70s, the media started to erupt with television, and now look, I'm talking to you wherever you are, mm-hmm. In real time, and information is instantaneous, and so our ability to talk about some of these things became unfiltered because we lost that length of time in between an event and when the information got to people. Mm-hmm. They could only put so many. I think they could probably only put so many things in the teletype, and now everything comes across unfiltered. And so, some of that's a good thing, and some of that's a bad thing.
The neighborhood, where I did when I was looking after kids, is in, an affluent neighborhood. And me, watch it, there'd be one child who'd be playing soccer, and I'd be, there in support. But there were two other younger children, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and there were bushes that were right before where a long street curves. And I always had to have a visual on the children because I'm hyper vigilant, because you can never get too comfortable because it's just that one moment of inattention. But I know that my vigilance when it comes to keeping it a visual on a child, knowing where they're playing, no hide and seek in a place where, it's not a controlled environment in some way, shape, or form. And I know that is from, growing up when I did grow up.
Right. And I think the story of Lindsay in Commencement, I think she's one of those kids that got missed. While to a certain extent, she was kept safe-ish. Once she got into the Department of Social Services, she certainly fell through all sorts of cracks and became this forgotten person. But there was something in her as a character that pulled people towards her, as reluctant as she wanted to be in participating in the world, as reluctant as she wanted to be in letting people into her life. There was some kind of quality about her that drew other people in. And
I really liked that about the book because, as you continue onwards, you realize that this kid has a lot of people in her corner, and she doesn't necessarily recognize it or know how to experience it, but she does, and she inspires this great amount of loyalty. And it's a beautiful thing because you carry on, like you said, you had this short as a short story, and then you had a groundswell of people interested in talking about it, is that she doesn't have great social skills. She's not comfortable talking to adults. She's not that scrappy, charismatic, kid. It's
well. There's one point in the story where, in the first chapter, where she's talking to this celebrity type person, and she realizes that they have a friend in common, and she starts to get really excited about having a conversation, but it's really awkward because she's aware she's never had an adult social conversation. She's talked to adults who were her supervisors in her group home, or her teachers, or her foster parents, but she's never had a social conversation with an adult. And she has this really awkward moment because she's very excited. And it's so sweet and so innocent, but it's also this really painful experience. And the person she's talking to gets it. Probably because she's, she's a Mr. Rogers kind of TV character, that she gets that this is a watershed event for this young woman, and it's because of Lindsay's behavior in those types of situations that it draws people in. Mm-hmm. The character that was sort of based on Mr. Rogers, Mrs. Pretty, Beth Pretty, actually says at one point that the reason she wants to be involved in Lindsay's life is because she was nice to Mrs. Pretty, and she didn't have to be. She was nice. She cared about me. She treated me well, and she didn't have to. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about Lindsay. Even though she was treated so badly in her life, she wants to treat other people better than she ever got.
But she also doesn't expect to be loved back.
Exactly.
She put her energy into setting up a kind of green room, and she was kind of grimy and dirty, and pretty much I think she had written herself off more than anybody around her. And what I like about the arc of the story is that slowly and painfully it becomes obvious that people love and care about her and nurture her, but she's still very, fiercely wants to be self-sufficient, mostly. And I think a big part of that is, not having faith that she's going to have some safe place to fall. She has to keep on keeping on, even when she barely can get up the stairs.
Exactly. Well, because in her experience, in her childhood experience, nobody has ever been there for her. And the course of the story, while it does seem like it was taking a long time, the course of the story is really over the course of a summer. It's from her high school graduation. So the course of the story is actually a very small window of time. So it would be unrealistic to have her be, ready, willing, and able to accept love and caring from other people. There's actually a spot in the story where she and Beth discuss how you're supposed to do a give and take in a family situation. Mm-hmm. You do something, I do something. You accept what I do for you. I accept what you do for me. I do the shopping, you do the cooking, I'll wash the dishes. Lindsay hasn't had that kind of experience in her life. And she really, as an 18-year-old, needs to be taught these things.
I like all the different walks of life and flavors of people. And, one of my favorite characters is Stu Pretty. Because I didn't think that he would be so darn wonderful.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he?
You never.
He's great.
You get this feeling before you meet him that this may not be going over well, and
this can't be a good thing.
This can't be a good thing, and it was just so heartfelt and beautiful, and
it was because he got it. He got it. And it's something. it's something, without giving too much of the story away, it was something about his character. He explains that whenever he had a grandchild born into his family, he greeted them the same way. Mm-hmm. That he would go to them as infants and hold them and tell them that it was going to be a wonderful life and that they were going to have all these wonderful adventures. And actually, that's something that my dad did with his grandchildren.
Aww.
And it was something I've always wanted to have a character do that when my dad would meet his grandchildren, he would hold them at the hospital and tell them that it's a great world. This is a great world, and you are gonna have such a wonderful time here, and we are so happy you came. And it always touched me because my dad was the father of 7, and he had a great number of he was fortunate enough to see a good number of his grandchildren born. And guys, particularly guys who were born in 1918, aren't always expected to be the kind of guy that's going to be touchy-feely like that. Mm-hmm. When his children were born, he was not allowed to be in the hospital room. And so it was really amazing as an adult seeing my dad going and greeting his grandchildren. I always wanted to have that in a story because I thought it was, just those kind of real moments, something that was, it was for him and that infant. The kid's probably never going to remember it. Who knows what infants remember? But it was so vital for him to tell his grandchildren what a wonderful world it was.
I know from when I was growing up that of course, kids are very self-centered, and in the best of ways and the worst of ways.
We're born tyrants.
Yes, and so one of the largest curiosities that I had when I was little is like, where did I come from? What happened on the day that I was born? I'm sure that, there's some of his grandbabies who are going to hear that story, or, you may tell them yourself. And even though it's not a memory of the experience itself, it's a memory of the familial shared experience. Like I was born and I guess it was like newfangled thing in the 70s to have, not all these bright lights and,
yes.
Have a more intimate birth. And my grandmother was there. She's an intensive care nurse in the same hospital. And, of course, I was very dramatic. My mother was Christmas tree shopping on the 18th of December, which is when I was born. And
happy pre-birthday.
I know, right? Thank you. Her water broke, and she went to the hospital. And apparently, my brother was huge before me, which makes sense as I continue the story. So the last push was quite enough, but the doctor had told my mom to push again, and I shot out like a rocket. And my father literally, lunged underneath the arms of the doctor to make sure he didn't drop me. So I joke with people, even from the start, I was like, ta-da, here I am. Making a dramatic entrance. So like these little stories, they make it through.
Yeah, it's as you say, it becomes a familial thing. I'm fortunate now to have several nieces who have have children of their own, and one of my nieces has 4. And when I went to see her youngest, I was holding her and started to cry, and my niece said, "Could someone get a picture of this, because she cries when all of them are born. It doesn't matter if it's the first one or the last one." She's like, "Who cries to have the 4th kid, that it's such a great thing, that it's so special?" And I said, "But it is special. Every one of them is so special. And that's from my dad.
Oh, see, warm fuzzy things happen on my shows. But to break the mood, you have fantastic cursing in Commencement.
Oh, isn't it great? Lindsay has a way with words, doesn't she?
Like, I wrote this one down, and a lot of them are unspoken, and sometimes, like, the unspoken curses are fantastically better than ones she blurts out. Oh, Mr. Shitty Fuckerson was one of them, and it's like, or, you know, like, fuckity fuck fuck, you know, like those. It's just like, that's fucking hilarious, and it's awesome, and I love it.
Yeah, I will take credit for that. I didn't steal one of them. And I will honestly say I have thought a few of them myself. So there you have it. Some of my bad behavior enters into Lindsay's life experience.
I also like that where you reveal that things aren't always as they seem. Like, for example, the guy that was with Miss Pretty, who turns out to be not only her lawyer but her son-in-law.
Yes.
But, he seems like this, like, really wound tight guy who wants to get rid of this miscreant who is Lindsay. And it turns out, like, I love, you're going to have to read it to find out what I'm talking. I love when he stood up and said, enough, and there's just so many great things that you did. That life is messy, relationships are messy, like,
and people aren't always who you think they are,
and shit's not gonna get smoothed over so easy, especially really climactic, crazy stuff. What I want to know is, why did you put a monk in the story?
Father Mark?
Yes. With his robes, Friar Tuck.
Friar Tuck?
Like, how did that happen? I was just like, what the hell? Do they still have monks? What is this?
Well, the reason he's in there is because he is Beth's brother.
That I know.
And where Stu loves Beth so much, Stu is Beth's father-in-law.
Yes.
But he clearly loves his daughter-in-law more than he cares for his own son. Mm-hmm. And it's because of his son's behavior. It's not because he's a bad man. He has issues with his son because of his son's behavior. So he clearly loves Beth. But as much as he loves Beth, he really hates Father Mark. Mm-hmm. He just can't bear him, and they fight all the time. And the only common ground they have is their feelings for Beth. And I wanted to do sort of like a little twist on sort of I wanted to reveal a little bit about sibling relationships, and I also wanted to reveal a little bit about how someone who, is a representative of a religion that's all about love and forgiveness and compassion can get into a really sticky situation when he has to support someone who's done wrong to a person he actually loves. That,
that was sticky, and he also had a level of blindness. He doesn't have a lot of common sense, I feel.
Well, and I think that's what happens. I really do believe, having met a lot of religious people and been involved with a lot of religious people, I think to get to the level where you can say, I love the sinner. I know that forgiveness is the way to go. I think a lot of the they have to strip down a lot of the stuff around it, and they can't look at the whole picture. Because if you look at the whole picture as a human being, you're gonna flip out. And the best real life example I have of this is there was an interview done with the Dalai Lama, and they asked him who was the most interesting, compassionate, amazing person that the Dalai Lama had ever met. And do you want to guess who he said?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Mm-mm.
George W. Bush.
Goodness.
Yep. He said he has a deep and abiding faith, and that he's true to his principles, and that he is a good man. All of which I believe is actually true. I do actually believe that's true. He, however, is responsible for the deaths of millions of people. And the Dalai Lama, I'm not trying to take anything away from the Dalai Lama, but he looked at a man like, very divisive character like George W. Bush, and took away all the acts that went with it and looked at the human being and came away with that this is a good person.
Of course, I'm not great at math, but for some reason I'm thinking of it geometrically. I'm just like, there's a missing spot in the connectivity between the who you are and the choices that you make, mm-hmm. as an indication of the who you are. And I'm talking about, specifically the character in the book, because, I have very fond memories and experiences with people of faith, including, the man who baptized me, and he just is a great person and a wonderful priest, and he's tall and he has these really big hands that even as an adult woman, I feel like they disappear when he holds them. And he had wisdom, and he was good, and he could see. And I think I don't disagree with the ministering to that, that child who nearly, who did some bad things in the name of what he thought was the right thing, what God wanted him to do. And all I could think to myself is like how awfully manipulated this child was, regardless of if he's,
exactly. And that the boy that he was supporting was an equal victim of child abuse. What happened to the young man that Father Mark was supporting, he was abused. He was psychologically abused. Someone he respected and admired convinced him to do something. It convinced him that if he loved her enough, he would murder somebody. And if that's not child abuse, I don't know what is. And I think that the priest, Father Mark, I think he saw that child as suffering, and he knew the boy wasn't safe yet. And I think he in his own thinking was, Lindsay is safe, but this boy isn't, and he needs this support. I can't say, now as the writer, having set up this terrible scenario, these terrible choices that people have to make, I can't say the priest made the wrong choice. He might have gone at it in a different way, but he was very worried about losing somebody in the whole deal.
Well, I think that he's a poor communicator.
Oh, definitely. But
and if he wasn't,
how much practice do monks get at communicating?
Well, I know. If we think of like the practical, brass tacks of it all, but I think that he had if he was wiser in the ways of communication, then there wouldn't be such a feeling of betrayal, because they'd understand where he was coming from.
And we see this. We see what a bad communicator he is with his family. Perhaps with other people he's not. But we see what a bad communicator he is with his family when he is having a conversation and he teases his sister about being adopted. His sister, who's in her 50s now, he teases her about being adopted, and she's so clearly hurt that Lindsay realizes. Lindsay, who's only known her a few weeks, Lindsay can see how hurt this woman is, and her brother, who has known her all her life, cannot. So, he's a man who has all this education, and he's a man who, maybe we never really see him talk to other people. We only see him in his communication with his own family, and he's terrible talking to his own family. He's terrible at it.
And, I think that also given his occupation, which is, it's not an occupation, it's just, it's a lifestyle.
Actually, it's a vocation.
It's a vocation. It's some serious stuff. I think he probably has vision and clarity for some things, and just blindness for others. Like, he's human. And the thing is, like, I didn't feel as betrayed, but I understood how Lindsay would feel betrayed. And I have one more question about this story, because I want to, spend a little time talking about the Ripper's daughter.
Sure.
There are times when, as a speaker or as a thinker, she sees herself as Ash, and other times she sees herself as Lindsay. Was that, like, if that was intentional, like, how did you decide which was where?
By the end of the story, at the beginning of the story, she always considered herself Ash.
Okay.
She never identified herself as Lindsay. It was always Ash, and everybody around her called her that. And in the middle of the story, you see her sort of, as people are starting to emerge to support her, you see her vacillating back and forth. And the transition really happens when, with the crowd from the mass transit. I love those three guys. Franny is a great character. You see her transitioning with them after the wife of one of the mass transit guys looks at her scars and tells her that they're not as bad as she thinks they are. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, Ash starts to start thinking about herself as Lindsay, mm-hmm. and not someone who's as damaged as she thought she was. And then by the end of the story, she has completely abandoned the Ash personality, the Ash identity, and has literally become herself, who she was always meant to be.
I agree there. The only thing that I didn't feel was a good fit is there's the coming full circle between Beth not reading her pre-written speech, for the graduation, and Lindsay deciding not to read what she had been feverishly writing for days. I'm not sure I bought the turnaround.
Oh, then I didn't do a good job.
You like smack me. It's like bad.
Sometimes you do things and it works, and sometimes you do things and it doesn't work.
I just felt that was too that was too much growth. And I guess because it was so thick.
I'll explain to you where I was going with that.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying about the too much growth, but if you take out those angry days, like if we hadn't had those angry days, it would have been easy to see her make that decision.
Well, I could see her not being vindictive,
right,
and having a more mature view of the situation, but I just didn't believe the L word as a part of the speech, because I can't give too much away, because you have to read it to see what's going on.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I grappled with that. But the way I looked at it was for her to be able to say, and we're going to say the L word, for her to be able to say to the person who had been so cruel to her that she loved her anyway. Mm-hmm. you have to be able to remember how I set Lindsay up. She was looking out at a group of people she knew who loved her, who had welcomed her into their lives. She was wearing Beth's coat. She was literally, protected, wrapped in the love of this woman who had taken her into her home and embraced her as her own daughter. And she had the state police officer there with his big fucking gun.
Yes.
Who promised her that he would protect her. And can we say fucking? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, you can curse a blue streak. That's it's not only okay, it's expected on occasion.
Okay. So what I was going for was she was never going to feel safer in the love she had created in the community she built around her. There was no point in her life. She was looking right at them all. Mm-hmm. She was never going to feel safer. And if she was not able to say that she loved that person anyway, but she would never have been able to go on with her life. But if you didn't get it, if you didn't buy it, that's what I was going for. But if you didn't get it and you didn't buy it, then I didn't do a good job as a writer.
Well, here's the thing.
And that happens,
No. Here's the thing. I would have bought forgiveness. I would have bought strength. I would have bought her not being vindictive or, just giving a laundry list of all the fucked up things that this person has done. I just didn't believe that she loved her or that she would continue to love her. That's what I did not buy into.
I get exactly what you're saying, and that's my failure as a writer, not being able to do it better.
Oh, it's just not so bad when you put it that way.
Well, no, but it's true. It's true. I wish, I saw this great video earlier today that really, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. One of the moms of one of the Sandy Hook victims made a video, and it's beautiful and heartbreaking and terrible and wonderful, and if you get a chance to watch it, you have your box of tissues ready. But the last, it's like a 6-minute video. The last full minute of it, she talks about how her heart is so full of love, and we're only a year later. And no, an amazing group of people down in New Jersey, amazing families, just a tremendous community down there. But I heard that just today, and to sit there and listen to this woman who's lost so much talk about how her heart is so full of love, and I feel bad that I wasn't able to convey that better at the end of Commencement.
Because I didn't. That was the only thing that didn't ring.
That's right. Sometimes you hit them out of the park.
And sometimes,
sometimes you don't. You can't always be Ortiz.
No, I don't even know who that is.
Big Papi. Did you know we won the World Series?
Yeah, but I'm a Yankees fan, so.
Did I mention that earlier? I think about mentioning the Red Sox.
There's one of the things I just want to close out talking about this story is you hit the reason why I was mad at you, ironically, for making me cry so much was how well you captured the emotions. Like I could almost picture you having her childhood. That's how real it was for me.
Mercifully, my childhood was nowhere near.
No, but and even reading The Ripper's Daughter and like the fucked up shit going on in there, It's like you have a finger on the pulse of the dark side.
Well, and a good deal of that is it is part of what my day job is. I work in healthcare, and I'm a trained behaviorist. I watch people for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear their backstories, a lot of times you can see, you learn over time when you see certain behaviors. There's similar backstories coming up here. I also, when I read just some terrible, terrible stories in the newspaper, I have a very hard time shaking them until I write them off.
Ah.
And, there is no end to the amount of cruelty people will do to other people.
I remember thinking to myself earlier, 20 years ago when I was reading this, just kidding, recently, I remember thinking to myself, there's some really dark stuff in here. And when, for genre fiction, which is the majority of what I review, lesbian fiction, going to an extremely dark place is, doesn't happen. If it, that it can exist to a certain degree, within the context of a detective novel or whatnot, mm-hmm. but the visceral and at times disgusting, mm-hmm. I was like, I kind of like reading it because it's different, and I think I encountered it more in mainstream fiction. And there's an author I like to have on my show, Patty Henderson, and she reads some dark stuff on my show, and I love it. And she's got an appreciation because I love stories. It's not, it's like if it doesn't have a happy ending, that's fine. And she has this one paranormal story that does not end well, and there's no shiny, happy moment at the end of it. And it was so disturbing. But at the same time, I enjoy storytelling in all its forms, and I have an appreciation for it. But I remember thinking to myself as I was reading this, like, whoa.
Well, that actually, with Ripper's Daughter, the ending is not the ending I wrote. The ending I wrote it with Anders, my writing partner and business colleague in SGW. She liked the ending I wrote, but as she so gently put it to me, nobody will ever read anything we write ever again if we put this ending in there. Mm-hmm. She's like, it's an excellent ending. In a different world, we could probably do it. But if you put this ending in there, where I actually made I made one of the lead characters the killer, which was a bold choice.
Which, now if you still have that deleted scene, I would love to read it.
It was a bold choice. But she wasn't wrong. She said, there's a couple of, pragmatic things to think about. You will destroy your audience's faith in you. The next time you go to write something, they won't trust you because you've led them astray. Plus, who wants to read something really that sad? And destroy the franchise if we ever want
horror,
to read
thriller,
characters,
horror, thriller, whatever, whatnot. There's always going to be misdirection and twists and turns and whatnot, and the best of that style, that genre, involves tricking people.
Exactly, but you can only go so far.
Yes, and it's like, in lesbian fiction, you can't kill off the main character, and you can't horribly disfigure them either. And the reason why I mentioned that is, like, I was at a reading. Lynn Ames was reading one of her books, and now I'm like losing the title of it. But anyway. There was a character.
That's okay, because this is probably the only time my name and Lynn Ames will ever come up in the same conversation. So So roll with it, baby.
Roll with it. All right. So anyway, she knew that she had to have an explosion and that the character would be injured, but she also knew that there's kind of a limit to what the tolerance people have for certain things happening to characters that they become attached to, and I become very attached to the characters that I read. And so I can relate to it. You're like, no, you can't do that. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a series that I was reading, and an author I'm very loyal to, reading her stuff. And when I could sense there was foreshadowing that a particular character was going to be the target of an organized crime boss, I couldn't deal. I stopped reading the book because I'm like, this character has already gotten hit by a car and injured her head and, had a lot of, issues trying to heal. It's like, you can't do anything more to her. I can't handle it. So I put the book down. And then there was another book that I read of Lynn Anderson. It's like Eyes on the Stars, which really disturbed me. Intensely disturbed. I was so distraught by the story, and even though the ending was kind of bittersweet, I was so distraught that I was crying to my partner, trying to explain what happened in the book. And then I had a movie date that night with a friend of mine, and I was crying, trying to explain to her what happened to it and how horrifying it was and how heartbreaking it was. And it was just like, I had made true to form. I was in the question and answer section, and I started talking about it. I got really upset.
Oh, no.
Because
but that tells you the author did a really great job.
And did something that most authors will not risk doing, which is,
right.
Okay, it's spanning the lives from the time that these characters are fresh-faced and in their 20s to when they're elderly and about to pass away, and that the majority of their life was spent broken and heartbroken about not being with this particular person. And even though they meet in what literally is the twilight of their life and it ends, they are reunited, it was just so fucking depressing. And I was never expecting that.
And there's times when you should read books like that. There are times that you have to read books like that because they force you to make decisions in your own life, to seize a moment.
Carpe diem.
If it's not, if I was at a writers' conference recently, and one of the writers told this. I hope I can tell the story without crying. The writer and his wife have a series of sci-fi stories, and he created this very minor character who had been in and out of a lot of their books. Just a very minor character. And there's one point in one of the stories, and he was just kind of just a fun guy. He wasn't a particularly good warrior or anything, but he was always there, the guy that gave them all a chuckle or whatever. And there's a point in one of his book series where this character, he's the only one to stand against an army. And if he stands there, he can save everybody else. And so he stands there, and the phrase that they used was, and his son went out for the last time, which is really a beautiful way to talk about a character passing away. Mm-hmm. And he said when he wrote it, both he and his wife burst into tears and had to hold each other crying.
Aww.
And a few years later, he was at a book signing, and a soldier was brought to the table to have a book signed. Mm-hmm. And the soldier was missing a leg and an arm, and he was in his full uniform. And he had this beat-up old copy of the book that the character passed away in. Mm-hmm. And he asked them to sign it, and they did. And he said, when it came to be my time to stand against an army, I did. And he did it because of what he read in that book. And he saved a lot of people. And it is, what we do as writers is important. We remind people about what their humanity is all about. Mm-hmm. We have to write some terrible things to remind them that they have choices about who they're going to be next. Mm-hmm. Every day we decide who we're going to be. We're either going to be a good guy, a bad guy, or a supporting character in our own life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some days we play all three parts. And some days we're not prepared to play the part we end up having to play. And I think books are ways of people to work through these things before they're faced with those moments. And if a character can touch you so deeply that when you're faced with this terrible choice and you make a choice you can live with for whatever the remainder of your life is, then the writer did an excellent job.
Of course, you made me cry with that story.
Isn't it?
It's so profound. And
Tracy is he's an amazing guy. And, you know, I don't know how he said he felt it was his responsibility as a writer when he was facing that young man not to cry. And he and his wife somehow managed to sign the book and have pictures taken with the young man. And the young man actually managed to stand next to them. And they managed to get through it without crying, although when he was telling it, none of us could stop crying.
Oh, my God.
But
it's moving, and
that's what you hope to be able to accomplish as a writer, that you help people dig down deep and find out who they are. You know, in Commencement, people can look at that and try to decide who they want to be in that story. Mm-hmm. Do they want to be the person who saves Lindsay, or do they want to be the person who walks away from it? You know, do they want to be the person that makes sure nobody gets hurt, or do they want to be the person that just wants everything to stay quiet? You know, who do you want to be?
These are some serious questions to ask
I know. And we didn't talk about Ripper.
I know.
And I didn't tell you about Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, you know what? Then I'm just going to have you on the show again.
I know.
So I've liked all of the interesting intellectual, heart-beating, tear-jerking, all the other different myriad of emotions and ideas that came forth during this most auspicious interview. And I wanted to thank you for bringing it.
I appreciate it, and I do hope that that other people will read Commencement and find it as interesting and heartfelt as you did.
Oh, I'm sure they will.